So I'm Amanda Tonkovich. I have many roles. I'm with the New Orleans Sexual Assault Response Team. I'm the coordinator for our whole sexual assault response team in New Orleans. I'm also at our Family Justice Center is who I'm employed by, and I am the sexual assault program director over there, and I am also a therapist. So our traditional SART members are usually those people that are related to the criminal justice response. So we're talking law enforcement, the DA's office, advocates, healthcare personnel, so usually SANE nurses, crime lab, and those core members that are in that criminal justice response. So I think non-traditional partners bring a ton of benefits to the SART. One is just to get outside perspective. When you're kind of caught up in that core group in the criminal justice response, I think unfortunately we can get a little bit one-tracked. So I think that having that outside, those outside ideas and outside voices and eyes, they improve accountability, they make us way more creative. And just bring new ideas to the table. For example, we recently made a partnership with our Bartenders Guild. So now we are working towards creating a curriculum that's actually bartender-centric. They're going to take the lead on the curriculum, and we're going to assist them so that all of our local bars can actually be trained up in bystander intervention and reducing sexual violence. And that's a community that we never would have been able to reach just through our traditional SART. Another cool thing that I've learned from them is that they already have some great strategies for detecting danger, for de-escalation, and their own network where they're tracking perpetrators. So we are getting all this awesome information that we never would have had access to if we only involved traditional SART members. Yeah, I think orienting new team members is extremely important. A lot of people don't even necessarily know what a SART is or what we do, and SARTs look different depending on where you work or where you live. So I think it's really important for partners to understand how the SART can actually help them and isn't just an extra meeting. I think also as part of orientation, we need to understand what other people do. So one of the things our SART did was actually start out with a mapping process. So we had each discipline get up and actually said, what do you do during your day-to-day, right? Because even though we work together, I think we make a lot of assumptions about what people do and how they're maybe not doing it right. But when we all get in a group and we learn what the other person's doing, I think we can have more compassion and understanding, and then also work together more constructively. So I think that mapping process is really key to at least the beginning of the SART, and when you're having new members come in, you want them to understand how the response works and what the challenges and benefits of each discipline are and how they can help each other. I think there's a lot of reasons that there's frequent turnover on SART teams. First of all, we just get people who are getting transferred from position to position, people who are leaving their job. Unfortunately, in our world, we also see really high rates of burnout. So we see people that have too high a caseload or, just too much vicarious trauma, and they leave the discipline. So I think one important strategy for reducing turnover is just getting a lot of buy-in from your SART. So I think if people feel supported, they feel like they're working as part of a team, they're gonna want to work together and they're gonna want to stay in their position. I think there's a lot of challenges for SARTs being sustainable. One of the major issues is just that we do have a lot of turnover. So we build a relationship with a certain individual or discipline, and then that person leaves, and sometimes it feels like we're back at square one. So I think also, I know there's not a lot of designated funding for SART, so having a person who is a dedicated leader and who can actually just send out the meeting minutes, who can, run the meeting, who can make sure they're troubleshooting throughout the month. I think often we don't have the resources for that, and that can be a downfall of a SART for sure. There's many things that SARTs need to do to continue to exist. I think one key factor is building really deep relationships. So not just having a relationship, say, with the particular law enforcement person that comes to your MDT meeting, but to know the whole sex crimes unit, right? One of the advantages we had, we recently had a turnover with our SANE program, but luckily we didn't just know the SANE coordinator, who is fantastic. We knew most of the SANE nurses. So when we had that turnover, we were were able to lean on the other nurses so that our response didn't suffer because of that turnover. So another way that we've found to keep our SART sustainable is to find places for those people that want to be involved in the sexual assault response or prevention, but can't come to our multidisciplinary team case review group, which is a closed group for good reason, to respect survivor confidentiality. But unfortunately, there's a lot of partners that would like to be part of our SART, but can't come to that. So the solution we've found is to not just have that closed criminal justice group once a month, but to also have a monthly community SART meeting where those partners are welcome to the table. So one great relationship that came out of that was our relationship with a Krav Maga studio in town. And while they aren't part of the criminal justice response, they have been fantastic in helping us with fundraising for our prevention efforts, as well as providing free classes for survivors who want to make self-defense a part of their healing. I think another important tool for sustainability is to have a written protocol. And that's not always possible in the beginning because you kind of need to get the nuts and bolts and each discipline needs to kind of know what they're doing. But once you have that together, it's important to have a written protocol so you know how is the police activating the advocate, how do we deal with a survivor who shows up at the hospital, making sure they have their options. So having that written protocol is great because when you get turnover, you don't have to reinvent the wheel. The person that's coming in can be oriented to the SART and how we operate, and hopefully services can remain at the same level as it was before. I think there's a couple ways that we can increase sustainability. First, I think, is giving people actual roles so we get that buy-in. So not only are they expected to attend a meeting, they're expected to maybe lead the meeting. Or in our community SART, we have committees. So they actually can be in charge of a committee and working towards a project that involves the whole SART. Another way to build in that sustainability is for those individuals that are participating in SART to go back to their own agencies, to their own discipline, and share what they're doing and share how this is helpful. So I think especially if we get buy-in from the top, from the leaders in the police department, in the DA's office, in the advocacy organizations, that's going to trickle down, and that discipline's going to be more excited about participating in this multidisciplinary group. So one way that home agencies can support the SART is by providing leadership, providing some dedicated funding or dedicated time to a staff member to coordinate the SART. Because I think without a dedicated person, often things just fall apart, even if it's just that person to write emails, remind people about meetings, to follow up when we found a gap to make sure that we're closing it. I think one leadership strategy that helps to sustain a SART is giving other people opportunities to be leaders. So while you do need a centralized coordinator, that coordinator definitely needs to designate other people to take on projects. One, because it's too much for any individual, but two, that's a great way to get buy-in, get people excited, and get new ideas to the table. I think engaging with diverse partners just makes us more creative. It makes us more sensitive to different communities and different issues, and it just helps us to look outside the box and also, I think, have that level of accountability, right? I think it's easy in a closed group to kind of get one tracked, but in this open group, you're not just accountable to the direct people you work with, you're accountable to the whole community. So for our community SART group, it has a couple components. We always do some sort of cross-training. So a discipline comes up and speaks. We've had Crime Lab come. We've had, the police come. We've had all sorts of our human trafficking task force. So just to make sure that we are all getting knowledge about resources and best practices. Another great component of our community SART meeting is just networking. People know each other's faces. So when I have a survivor, say at Tulane University, I know exactly who to call if that survivor wants to get their dorm changed. So I think just those warm referrals we're able to give and just seeing each other on a monthly basis has greatly streamlined our response and has been a huge advantage. So including survivor voices, I think first has just helped to really ground us in the work. I think sometimes we get so caught up in the systems that we forget what we're working for. So having survivor voices at the table, first of all, just grounds us in the importance of the work we're doing and how impactful a good or bad response can be for a survivor. It also having survivors involved also highlights gaps that we may not see as professionals. Because we're not on that end of the response, there's a lot of gaps that we see that maybe are important to us, but then when we talk to a survivor, we get a whole nother perspective, and then which is extremely important. So one way that we include survivors is by actually inviting them to come to our community SART meeting, whether they want to come in person to talk about their experience or write a victim impact statement that can be read by their person of choice. Having survivor voices in our SART has been invaluable. A lot of the major changes that we've made have been because of feedback from survivors. So, for example, we had a survivor come in who had gone kind of through the whole criminal justice response. And at the end, she kind of said, I wish there was just a book that I could have gotten right after my SANE exam that told me about this process, because I had to kind of learn it bit by bit and, through trial and error. So we were like, oh, great, a book. We could do that. So we went ahead and our SART created a survivor's guide that actually goes step by step about what happens when you're engaged in a criminal justice process and has all the resources and numbers for advocates, of course, throughout that manual. I think a reason that it's important to have survivor input is that we just get so focused on what we're doing on a day-to-day basis. So, for example, prosecutors are really focused on prosecuting a case and winning it. They're not necessarily focused on how the survivor is doing. But when we hear back from survivors, we realize that our systems actually have an impact on their healing, on their rates of post-traumatic stress disorder. So from hearing back from survivors and seeing what an impact a positive criminal justice response and a respectful response can bring, I think it's inspiring and helpful to all members of the SART to do a better job.